I served as an astrogator second class on the inaugural voyage of the Cosmic Voyager, the one where we encountered the nebula orb. As it happened, I was the first to catch sight of it, through the spotter scope I was using to align the astrocomp's sensors for a star fix. At first, I thought my eye was playing tricks on me, as a glowing ethereal blob drifted across my field of vision. Then the scope shifted to track the light source, as I'd programmed it to do, and autofocused. The bubble reappeared, much more clearly defined now and visibly reflecting the light of the now distant sun. I'll admit, it took me a moment to gather my thoughts as the scope continued to follow the bubble across the starscape. I mean, would you readily believe you just spotted an unknown vessel when you knew full well there was nobody else cruising around in Kronos orbit? For a few seconds, I wondered if someone had inserted it into the electronic interface as a joke, but then it turned 90 degrees and disappeared behind a ring fragment. This wasn't an electronic glitch or a man-made bit of data loose in the system. It was real. That's when I hit the all-hands alarm. Lieutenant Zephyr arrived in a rush, tumbling into my workspace with his tunic half undone. He glared at me across the compartment and grumbled, "This better be good." "Yes, sir," I replied. "We're not alone, sir." "Not alone?" He stared at the screen. "What do you... Oh shit." As we both watched, the bubble drew close to one ring fragment, as if to inspect it, then bobbled over to another. "What in the world is that thing?" I attempted a shrug. "I'm guessing not one of ours, or any other space agencies." "Damn right," he said. He keyed the mic on his tunic lapel. "Captain, this is McCoskey in astrogation. We've got a genuine, non-Earth origin object on scope flying around out there. Is there anything on radar?" Captain Stellaris responded promptly. "No, Lieutenant. We don't have any NEOs on our screens up here. Radar wants to know the last time you cleaned your scopes." "With all due respect, ma'am, this isn't space dust. I'm sending you the last 30 seconds of footage." He nodded at me, and I got to work doing just that. 40 seconds later, the captain contacted McCoskey again. "I'll ask you once and only once, Lieutenant. Is this a prank? If it is, we'll forgive and forget this one time." McCoskey glanced at me and I shook my head. He winced while looking at the image on the scope. "No, ma'am, I repeat, negative on prank. Vega insists it's a genuine NEO. I trust her." "Well, radar says they're not getting any kind of return from whatever that thing is," Lorimar said irritably. "Maybe it's non-ferrous," I suggested. "Low radar signature." McCoskey relayed that, and there was silence from the other end. The radar techs, I knew, were fiercely proud of their equipment, though it was calibrated to get images back through heavy interference, rather than picking out iridescent soap bubbles darting through the rings of Kronos. "So what happens now?" I asked. McCoskey studied the image on the screen. "I'd say the captain's going to call back to Earth and get authorization to initiate first contact, in which case I suggest you get some sleep. We're not going to get any coherent orders for at least an hour and a half, and that number's only going to increase for each politician they bring in on it." "Yes, sir," I agreed, heading for the hatch. "Oh, and Vega, congratulations," he said. I paused in the hatchway. "What for?" He gave me a half smile. "You found them, you get to name them. Have fun." "Great," I said wearily, and headed for my bunk room. Our orders came back eventually. It only took 5 hours, which I figured meant that minimal political wrangling had occurred. We were to put our original mission, descending into Kronos' atmosphere to see what was down there, on hold, and initiate first contact protocols. This didn't worry anyone too much. It wasn't as if Kronos was going anywhere after all. A handful of the crew expressed concern about the fact that we didn't have even a BB pistol aboard. What if the aliens attacked us and attempted to take the ship, they wondered. So what if they did, the more experienced crew members countered. It took years to train each crew member on the Cosmic Voyager to operate the ship at a decent level. A group of aliens wouldn't even know how to open the airlock without help. It would be like an accountant climbing into the cockpit of a suborbital jet and performing a perfect takeoff. Wouldn't happen. We fired up our drives and moved closer to the nebula orb. Until then, it had seemingly been ignoring us. But now it appeared whoever was on watch had been dozing at their station, because the object suddenly jerked backward, about 10 kilometers, and then halted in space. I could almost picture wide-open eyes staring at us, thinking, where on earth did you come from? Without a radar return to work with, and being reluctant to bounce a laser off it in case we appeared hostile, it was difficult to get an accurate read on its exact distance and thus its precise size. I guessed it to be around 500 meters across, and a perfect sphere, subtly reflective on the sun side and softly glowing on the dark side. With my assigned task to name the race, I officially dubbed their ship the Nebula Orb, and the race inside received the temporary label Frostlings. Nobody disagreed with me, which just left the most crucial job: establishing contact. The radio team soon began bombarding the bubble with every frequency the onboard equipment could produce, and some resourceful electrical engineers rigged up a few more on top of that. Not to be outdone, the radar team wired in a signal interrupter so they could pulse messages through their emitters. I even offered to lean out an airlock with a signal lamp, working through the visual spectrum and a bit on either side of it. At last, after nearly half a day of this, we received a signal in return. It was faint and at the very edge of the frequency range we could detect, but it was unmistakably a signal. As we observed and listened, it repeated the digital sequence we had transmitted, then finished it and sent one of their own. While we didn't have any first contact specialists aboard, we had plenty of scientists with a wide array of secondary specializations. In no time, they were exchanging messages back and forth, determining what number systems they preferred, base 8, what their periodic table resembled, similar to ours but oddly truncated about 2/3 down, and developing a shared lexicon. Once we'd established a method of transmitting an image we knew they would receive correctly oriented and in the right color spectrum, we included a picture of Kronos in the upper corner for reference. We sent over 4 images of crew volunteers. These were Captain Stellaris and myself, the oldest and youngest women on board, one of the scientists, and a 17-year-old ensign named Novak, who reddened whenever I noticed him. In exchange, we received images of several octopoids with short purple tentacles, somewhat transparent. We could verify the colors were accurate by the image of Kronos they'd included as well. The scientists were practically salivating over the images, which showed sashes or skirts of some kind of material. I wasn't certain if these were meant to be ornamental or for modesty, and I had no way to ask. We hadn't yet covered abstract concepts like nudity or taboo. It was around this time that one of the scientists asked the captain if we shouldn't invite the Frostlings back to Earth. We were currently in a parking orbit around Ganymede, but surely an ongoing first contact mission took priority over an exploration of a gas giant's upper atmosphere? Captain Stellaris relayed the suggestion to Earth, while we continued our back and forth with the Frostlings. They appeared as enthusiastic as our scientists to communicate with someone new. The questions posed in the stilted manner necessitated by our limited shared vocabulary hinted at a profound intellectual curiosity. We were confident they would agree. The reply arrived. We were instructed to extend the invitation courteously, but not press the matter if they declined. That suited us fine. It was clear the Frostlings were eager to learn more about us. They had already inquired extensively about our material science. So Captain Stellaris posed the question through the scientists. Would you be interested in visiting our homeworld to converse with more of us? To witness our civilization firsthand? I could have sworn the entire ship brightened for a moment. The response came back. Most certainly yes. They would very much like that. Then there was a pause. Another message came through. Which star do you hail from? One of the scientists chuckled as he composed the answer. This one right here. He included an image captured moments ago of the distant sun. As it happened, Earth was visible off to the side as a tiny blue speck, so he added a helpful arrow. This time, the pause from the other vessel was considerably longer. It stretched on for so long that one of the scientists sent a message, asking if everything was all right. The reply that came back seemed almost hesitant. We should have inquired about this earlier. Following that was a query about our biological composition and processes, including our comfortable operating temperature. This kind of information was routine for the scientists, so they compiled it all and sent it over. Carbon-based, oxygen, carbon dioxide breathing cycle, heavy reliance on water, average body temperature 310 degrees Kelvin. We'd explained Kelvin early on and received their temperature range shortly after. Once again, there was a long pause. Then we received a data packet, and you've never heard so many jaws drop. Where we used water, they utilized liquid hydrogen. That was the basis for what their bodies used for blood. Instead of carbon, their biology employed sodium in ways that made our biologists curse and pull their hair out. Their operating temperature was 10 Kelvin, so cold that even our most advanced cold environment suits would freeze solid and shatter. But we would be even more dangerous to them. Simply being near them would cause their blood to boil, and if they somehow survived that, mere contact with water would make their bodies explode. A number of small inconsistencies suddenly made much more sense. They were as near to the sun as they dared venture, even with their reflective vessel. They'd assumed we were incredibly courageous and advanced, since we were cruising around in a ship that didn't seem concerned with heat dissipation, even as we skirted the edge of an inferno. Meanwhile, we were thinking, wait until you reach Mercury's orbit. It was a humbling realization. Humans and frostlings were united in intelligence and the desire to explore the cosmos, but they could never meet in person. No human would ever grasp a bubbler's tentacle in greeting. We could and did exchange many scientific findings, including their faster-than-light drive, with the caveat that we would need to construct and operate it at near absolute zero until we devised workarounds, and some of our superior heat insulation materials, but there would always be that separation between us. Eventually, we did go our separate ways. The nebula orb turned and darted out of the solar system, accelerating more and more until it was a silver streak, then a speck, then gone. Captain Stellaris instructed the scientists to pack up their equipment and prepare to carry out our main mission. All we'd learned from the frostlings had been sent to Earth, and now it was time to do what we'd come out here for. While I was securing the astrogation gear, Lieutenant Zephyr entered the compartment. "Good work there, Vega," he said. "Thank you, sir," I replied. "Just doing my duty." I sighed. "It's unfortunate they couldn't visit Earth." He laughed. "Consider it this way. We've got no territory they desire, and they've got no territory we desire. If nothing else, we'll never go to war with them." As the cosmic Voyager prepared to dive into the swirling cloud layers, I nodded. It wasn't much in the way of comfort, but at least it was something. Did I ever mention the time I got invited to hell? I did once, you know. A sentient being composed of pure hellfire and radiation asked if I wanted to visit his home. Well, myself and the rest of the crew of the Stellar Seeker. Let me try to help you understand how problematic this would have been for us. This was a world where liquid dihydrogen monoxide fell from the sky and gathered ocean-like over most of the surface of the land, and there was an atmosphere consisting mainly of oxygen-2 and nitrogen-2, so hot that it had been vaporized. Indeed, vapor. I'm not fabricating this. Their world is so near their star that their life emerged from carbon compounds, if you can fathom it. Even worse, they inhale the vaporized oxygen-2 and nitrogen-2 as part of their life cycle. It makes my tentacles go limp just considering it. I personally struggled with the concept until I discovered that their resting temperature is so high that they can liquefy dihydrogen monoxide at a touch, and in fact opt to consume it regularly. It constitutes the majority of their circulatory fluids. They don't view it as a mineral so much as a transitional material, more commonly seen in its molten state. So if they respire rock vapor and casually immerse themselves, yes, immerse in molten lava, what you might wonder, do they actually construct things from? The answer to that frightened two of our scientists so severely that they turned puce for 3 entire cycles. You see, these infernal beings are capable of easily manipulating materials that are so far down at the bottom of our periodic table that it's simply not worth attempting. They can produce and utilize compounds containing iron and even titanium. I vow upon my progenitors, I'm not inventing this. I don't even want to contemplate the temperatures involved. Worse still, their table also includes the forbidden materials, more of them than we'd ever anticipated understanding. They are able to handle these materials without detonating. In fact, I'm fairly certain they had samples with them that would have spelled doom to our vessel just by coming near us. So, where did we encounter these terrifying creatures? And how did we escape alive? I'm pleased you inquired. I was the second assistant astrogation observer on the Stellar Seeker, investigating a yellow star system. The fierce radiations of the horrifically active primary threatened to melt our hull and disrupt our systems even from hundreds of millions of SACAR away. In fact, we wouldn't have ventured so close except that there was a gas giant just on the edge of our safe limit that we could shelter behind if exterior temperatures threatened to become too extreme. The gas giant, as anticipated, had a highly active magnetic field, but we were well protected, all praise to our engineers, so that was actually the least of our concerns. It also possessed a small yet notable ring system, not nearly as spectacular as the next planet out, but still intriguing. We were mapping it, and I was adjusting our backup astrogation sensors when I received a proximity alert. There had been a heat surge in our immediate vicinity. Motion, we expected. This was a ring system with moons scattered about. Heat was more problematic. Our systems were managing the star's radiation, but a nearer heat source could penetrate the hull and end us all without warning. I triggered the alarm, then directed a sensor that way. One of the pieces of the ring, a chunk of ferrous material which I had casually thought had an unusually regular shape, was moving under propulsion. Whatever it was using for thrust sent my temperature readings off the chart. We were just fortunate that it was aimed away from us at the time. Even as I gazed at the impossible data, the bridge crew responded and moved us away to a safe distance. The unknown object ceased moving when we evaded it. It was certainly an inanimate object, but when I focused all available sensors on it, I could clearly detect signs of engineering work. If I were not mistaken, it had sensors as well, and they were focused on us. We paused then and observed each other. Two vessels from cultures previously unknown to one another, encountering each other around a planet that I was certain neither of us originated from. Where they came from, what they knew, what they had to say, I had no clue, but I was eager to find out. Things became hectic then. The scientists took control of the sensors, examining every inch of the iron rock, as someone dubbed it, for any hint of its origins or intentions. We probed it with careful analysis beams, hoping not to provoke it into attacking. Signals were transmitted along various frequencies. Scientists debated until they were green in the face over the material composition of the object. Ferrous alloys were impossible to create or manipulate, so we had to be receiving false readings. And then one of the passive sensors detected a signal coming from the iron rock, on a frequency we could not only receive but also duplicate. We decoded the signal, a simple numeric sequence, and transmitted a response. The excitement that filled the stellar seeker was tangible. We were making first contact with an entirely new civilization, the first such in thousands of star cycles. Information started to flow back and forth, in a stream that grew deeper and broader with each new insight. I was called into service, receiving the messages and relaying them, then recoding them to send back. Then we received images, aligning them with a true color image of the gas giant, nicknamed Red Spot for a massive cloud formation, gave us a picture of what these beings looked like. They appeared quite intriguing. Bipedal, which wasn't completely unusual, 2 limbs for locomotion, 2 for manipulation. Skin of a pinkish hue that on you or me would indicate severe nausea, but was apparently normal for them. Extraneous growths on the front and top of the brain case, which was also not uncommon. External coverings which implied they had imperfect internal temperature regulation. We arranged for images to be sent back. I was one subject, and I was permitted to wear my graduate honors sash to demonstrate our educational standards. It felt extremely odd to know that alien eyes, alien minds, would be examining an image of me. To them, I would represent our species. And then came the most astonishing message. They actually invited us to visit their planet. I mean, you know what a trust issue that is. Even among the Concordat, member states would spend dozens of solar cycles feeling each other out before revealing their home planet's locations. But here these beings were, literally saying, "Would you like to come visit? Would we ever? Of course we would." Besides, we'd gathered all the data we really needed from this gas giant system. Getting away from that terribly violent yellow star would make us all much happier. In all honesty, we wondered what kind of shielding system the Iron Rock had on board to allow them to just casually absorb all that deadly radiation without experiencing multiple system failures. Their drive thrust should really have been a hint there, but we were too excited to see it for what it was. So we inquired about our destination. Which star system would be home to these novel and intriguing beings? The response astonished us all. This very one here. To ensure we hadn't misinterpreted, the message was accompanied by an image of the star itself, with a marker indicating a tiny blue speck to the side. That was their world. That was their world. As distant as we were from the system's center, that planet, we hastily calculated, had to be at least 80% nearer. It was merrily circling within a fierce blaze of solar energy, enduring a hellish radiation bath that would easily obliterate the stellar seeker many times over. And these beings originated there. What could they possibly be composed of? One of the researchers sent a message. We should have asked this earlier. Attached was a request for precisely that information. Meanwhile, we began assembling the same data for our reply. You can guess what we received back. A resting temperature that would liquefy rocks, a circulatory system essentially consisting of molten lava, gaseous oxygen and nitrogen as their very life breath. They hailed from the very core of hell, and they had extended an invitation to us, all in innocence, naturally, but that didn't alter the situation. We would never meet face to face, so to speak. I would never inhale the same atmosphere as the youthful aliens whose images I had received and gazed upon. Friends we would be, perhaps even allies, but never close, never visiting. Well, until now. You see, the Stellar Seeker is departing again next week, and I'm joining. Some genius among the scientists had an idea, so we've decided to return and attempt to re-establish contact with them. Each side will construct telepresence robots of the other, and we'll visit by proxy in that manner. It's likely to be unwieldy and probably won't function nearly as well as they hope, but it's a proof of concept. I've been selected to operate one of the robots from our side. I get to don the suit. I have the opportunity to walk with humans. I've traversed the verdant hills of Earth. Not in my actual body, naturally. That would be incredibly lethal, incredibly quickly. If I were exposed to just 1/8 of the intense radiation, bathing that planet daily, my brain would liquefy and then burst. My blood would boil and burst. And my outer covering would simply burst once exposed to ambient dihydrogen monoxide, or what humans refer to as water. Such a harmless name for a lethal substance. They call it ice when it's below its melting point, and steam when it boils. Indeed, that's right. They actually named it for each of its states. Moreover, much of their industrial progress was driven by using the high-temperature vapor as a method of transferring energy from one system to another. If I'm understanding correctly, some of their machines still utilize it due to its extreme usefulness. Machines that also incorporate forbidden material to generate the energy initially. It was almost a relief to discover that getting within death range of forbidden material was also hazardous to them. It wouldn't make them burst or even kill them instantly, except in cases of extreme exposure, but it had the potential to make them ill. The worst cases might perish in 5 or 10 years. Oh, the horror. Yes, humans employ sarcasm too. I was very pleased to learn that. It's just one more thing that makes me glad I was on duty that day on the Stellar Seeker. Ensign Serena Vega walked beside me. We'd ensured that the relative measurements aligned. The telepresence body I was controlling came to about elbow height on her. I had 4 locomotion tentacles for movement, while I used the other 4 to gesture at our surroundings. And I had so much to gesture at. I must give full credit to the humans. When they set about constructing a telepresence body for me, they spared no expense. My tentacles possessed the full range of sensory, motivation, and manipulation capability. The sensors that corresponded with my eyes and auditory receptors were attuned to human-specific levels of sight and hearing, and my vocal apparatus was similarly configured to produce sounds that humans could hear. Yet the most remarkable technology was the actual signal connection. You see, none of our species will ever be able to venture within the orbit of the planet they call Kronos, which we refer to as Red Spot for obvious reasons, unless we work together to develop much more advanced shielding systems than we currently possess. I believe they're working on it, but they haven't quite achieved it yet. Nevertheless, there are a few planets on the far outer edge of their system that are more or less ideal for research stations. With their assistance, we've established some, and there's discussion of setting up a colony or 2. The humans seem utterly delighted by the concept, so all that remains is the engineering. All we really need to do is wear heat-reflecting suits on the surface when the planet, or the moon depending, is facing the primary, and we're at ease. And that's where the broadcast station for the telepresence unit is located. Which leaves just one issue: the speed of light, or rather, how slow it is when you're attempting to send a signal from the edge of the human solar system to Earth and receive a response within a reasonable time frame. When one message in and back out again can take up the entire working day, that's not exactly an ideal situation. The first few versions of the telepresence suits were tested out in and around the Pluto system. When I learned that name represents an ancient deity of the frozen underworld, I laughed so hard. Oh, laughter is another thing humans share with us too. Their version sounds odd, but I suppose ours sounds strange to them as well. The humans had theirs in a ship orbiting the Pluto-Charon system, while we were in a lab dug into the surface. We were close enough to one another that the light speed lag wasn't really an issue, but there's only so much cultural exchange one can do when you're walking around the corridors of a human spaceship. Still extremely fascinating, especially their astrogation equipment, or a newly constructed research laboratory. But then, the scientists stepped in to save the day. It turned out that another vessel was circling Triton, the biggest moon of the gas giant known as Neptune. Both those names are connected to the oceans of water that cover their planet. Remember that substance? Liquid dihydrogen monoxide? Yeah, that. Those are names of gods associated with their oceans. Fortunately, there's no liquid water out there. It's all ice, which is how I prefer it. The human scientists were operating telepresence rigs in the laboratory, working hand in tentacle with our folks, and ideas were flowing freely. They disassembled an FTL drive, don't ask me how those things function, and somehow flipped it inside out, using some human-specific materials to stabilize it. After that, it didn't travel anywhere, but it could emit a signal that was detectable up to a light year away, we verified, with a delay that was less than the margin of error on the instruments they were using. That's how we achieved faster-than-light information transmission. It took them mere seconds to figure out how to incorporate a couple of these into the telepresence circuit, and that's how I ended up guiding my human-built remote body over a series of gentle hills on distant Earth, while comfortably seated in a lab buried in Pluto's North Pole. Light speed lag can go bite my upper left tentacle. It turned out that Serena and I had been more or less chosen to be the unofficial ambassadors for our respective species, at least until they could work out how to establish official embassies. As such, our job descriptions had literally been revised to spend time each day comparing notes and familiarizing ourselves with each other's culture. Honestly, the more time I spent with her, and the more our respective languages were refined in the translators, the less foreign she seemed. Well, apart from being the equivalent of a walking, talking doomsday event, I mean. The thermal and potential chemical energy contained in one human's body, if released all at once, would obliterate the entire laboratory and kill everyone in it, which was why the humans very carefully didn't even direct a radar beam at us. Nevertheless, I found her likable. She even went as far as to apologize for the name she had given our species, based on the stellar seeker's appearance. Once I grasped the terminology, I had to concede the name was somewhat fitting. Soap bubbles were meant to be fleeting and incredibly easy to pop. They were also quite beautiful, as I observed when she produced a simple device that created them with a breath. Our entire species was even more delicate to humans than soap bubbles. Those could at least endure for dozens of seconds unprotected in that dreadful environment. So I really couldn't dispute the given name. It didn't prevent me from jesting about what we should call humans. Hell fiends, magma beasts or such. Serena found each new name more amusing than the previous, which was the whole aim of the list. The hillside we occupied sloped down to a calm lake, mirroring the sky's blue. I eyed it warily, reminded once more that the temperature my telepresence link transmitted to me as pleasantly warm was notably higher than ice's melting point. Yes, we have indeed adopted that word, and that gaseous oxygen permeated the atmosphere around me. Rather unnerving if I'd allowed myself to ponder it too deeply. The ground beneath my tentacles was covered with tiny soft green blades. I'd been informed this was grass, a wild-growing stationary life form that used sunlight for nourishment. Given that this sun was casting strong enough light to create a very clear shadow, I decided it had made a wise choice in its evolutionary history. Our biologists would have whole new fields of study to explore once the information I was gathering reached them. The sheer range of Earth's temperatures, all well above anything remotely survivable for us, naturally, meant they similarly had a vast array of life-supporting biomes. "What's on your mind?" Serena asked casually, lowering herself to a seated position. I adjusted my movement appendages to approximate the same position. I was reflecting on how beautiful the lake is and how seamlessly all this fits in here on Earth. She knew me well enough by now to complete the thought. But not where you're from. Progenitors, no. I shuddered at the idea. That much liquid water, placed there all at once? It would be akin to someone detonating a bomb. A massive bomb. We didn't engage in bombs or warfare in general. In the Concordat, our species had a well-established reputation as pacifists and researchers. She sounded entertained. Treacherous terrain. She cocked her head. So, how did your brilliant minds like the Invar samples we sent over? An unusual metal, I replied. If I'm interpreting what they told me correctly, it experiences minimal thermal expansion or contraction. Also, it's magnetic, which is beneficial. What's it composed of again? Copper and iron, as far as I'm aware. She retrieved a transparent container from a clip on her belt and consumed from it. Water, naturally. I had to remind myself that it was cooler than her body temperature and that she required it for survival. It was indeed a peculiar universe. We've had it for a couple of 100 years now. They used to utilize it in clock manufacturing. I can understand why. And I truly could. With the extensive temperature range on Earth, metal expansion or contraction would pose a significant engineering challenge in certain situations. We could never produce something like that ourselves. While we can barely manipulate copper, iron is far beyond our capabilities. But indeed, they are intrigued by it. With it, new concepts are emerging constantly. Our collaborative efforts are proving extremely valuable for both parties. That's positive. I'm pleased. She returned the container to its place. So, did you want to continue or head back? I think we can proceed a bit further. Wait a moment. I raised one of my appendages and pointed to a fluffy cloud that had just drifted into view. I've been observing those, but I'm uncertain of their composition. Ah, water vapor. Serena rose to her feet and brushed herself off. Water essentially evaporates, then lingers until enough of it gathers to form a rain cloud. I wasn't certain how expressive the telepresence robot's face was, but I did my best to convey concern. Water vapor? Steam? Isn't that hazardous even for you? She laughed then, and I felt relieved. Serena might have been native to an environment that would kill me instantly, but she wasn't recklessly suicidal, so anything she wasn't worried about was probably okay. Oh no, water can evaporate well below boiling temperature. Those are likely quite cool, actually. Maybe 15, 20 degrees. If it descended to ground level as fog, I'd just get a bit chilly and damp is all. Knowing precisely what 15 of their degrees meant in our measurement, I found that statement even more absurd because it was truthful. To her. Chilly and damp. Right. The communicator built into the telepresence unit chirped, and I stopped myself. Excuse me, I have a call. Go right ahead. She started doing stretches. I activated the comm receiver. I'm here. What's the issue? The voice that responded was that of our lead researcher. We're going to have to remove you from the session. Words come through via the FTL network that the Pyrax are encroaching on our worlds, and we must halt all non-defense activity. I'm afraid your interactions with Ensign Vega fall under that category. Wait, what? When did this occur? As you likely know, the Pyrax are a rather violent, aggressive species that has caused issues in the past. They like to flaunt the fact that they could handle higher temperatures than most species in the Concordat, by which I mean that our upper comfort level was their lower level. Just the last day or so, they've been given an ultimatum to stop, but they've disregarded it. Their fleet's larger and more powerful than before, and it appears they've obtained information about the location of our homeworld. That wasn't good. That wasn't good at all. Concordat members typically kept such sensitive information under wraps, except from those species they truly trusted, for precisely this sort of situation. And now, somehow, the Pyrax had obtained it. So what are we going to do? Hunker down, request assistance from the humans, hope for the best, disconnecting from telepresence robot in... Hold on! A dazzling flash of insight had just burst in my mind, brighter even than the human's home star. Don't cut the link. Can you connect me to the Pyrax invasion force instead? I need to be able to communicate with them in real time. Why? What can you accomplish? I wasn't certain, but I was willing to try. Perhaps something. Perhaps nothing. But if we can halt them now, it's preferable to people fighting and dying, right? There was a lengthy pause, and I suspected he was consulting up the chain. Very well. We'll see what can be arranged. Thank you. My vision cleared, and I was looking at Serena once more. She was gazing back at me intently, leaving me to wonder how she sensed something was amiss. You've got a problem. It wasn't a question. Can we assist? I hope so. Swiftly, I briefed her on the Pyrax situation. Are you comfortable with me doing the talking? I have most of a plan, but I can't execute it without your help. She grinned widely as I explained what I wanted to do. Absolutely, she agreed. Operation Shove It Up Your Ass is a go. I pondered that. I'm not certain Pyrax have excretory orifices. Their biology is centered around utilizing everything they consume. Won't be an issue. Her expression grew keener. We've got a long military tradition of taking individuals who desperately need a brand new asshole torn and accommodating them in that regard. Somehow, I believe you. In that moment, I almost felt sorry for the Pyrax. Almost. My comm unit chirped again. I activated the receiver. I'm here. Can we proceed? Yes, we can. High Command isn't sure what you aim to achieve, but any delay is a good delay. Connecting you now. I heard crackles and pops of static, then a long stretch of silence before a harsh voice came on the line. This is the Commander Prime Ultra of the glorious Pyrax Liberation Fleet. What unworthy creature dares to seek my audience? Oh, I am beneath your notice, merely a humble assistant astrogator, I replied smoothly. But I wish to bring your attention to this individual standing beside me. I activated the feed from my telepresence robot's visual sensors and made sure the commander's voice played through my speakers. Allow me to introduce Ensign Serena Vega. She's a human and a junior member of their military forces. Humans are our allies. Should you attack us, they will retaliate. That would not be a wise move for you, Commander Prime Ultra. An image appeared in my field of view, showing the Pyrax officer. Compared to Earth animals, they resembled stocky bipedal crocodiles, colored purple and green. The commander sneered at Serena's image. It doesn't look particularly formidable to me. No fangs, no claws. They might surprise you, I said casually. Ensign Vega, do you think you could hit that lake with a stone? I'm fairly certain I can. She stooped down and picked up a chunk of rock about the size of the end of my tentacle, then weighed it thoughtfully. I moved back a short distance to capture all the action, just in time to see her rear back and throw the rock in a huge arcing trajectory. My sensors tracked it perfectly until it landed in the shallow part of the lake with a tiny white splash. That proves nothing, the Commander Prime Ultra declared, though I detected a hint of uncertainty in its voice. Humans are evidently a high-gravity species, but throwing rocks will never determine the outcome of a war. Inform it that if they oppose our advance, we will liberate their homeworld, along with the rest of you low-temperature weaklings. Ah, I said, you are operating under a misconception. I am not physically present on this planet. That's the purpose of my telepresence robot. You see that lake? That is molten dihydrogen monoxide. The locals refer to it as water. The commander's snout lifted in surprise. The human is incredibly close to it, if that's the case. Is it trying to perish? I chuckled, amused. No, but you are. Ensign Vega, would you say it's a particularly warm day? She picked up on the cue, as I knew she would. Yeah, it's quite hot out today. I think I might have a drink. Unhooking the water bottle, she removed the cap and drank from it. I made my voice dry and scholarly. You see, Commander, that liquid she's consuming is pure water, dihydrogen monoxide. She enjoys drinking it. Serena finished drinking, then raised the bottle and poured some of its contents over her head. Ah, that's better. And yes, I added, she did just pour it over her unprotected cranium and face to cool down. The look on the commander's muzzle was best described as, what in the name of the progenitors am I witnessing? How is this possible? Humans, I explained carefully, are an extremely high-temperature species. They routinely shape and work iron and titanium. They handle the forbidden materials with only basic shielding equipment. Their home planet is only a little over 200 million Sakar from its primary. I turned my sensors to capture a clear image of the incandescent yellow sphere. They can survive in temperature extremes that would dissolve you into your component compounds. And indeed, they drink molten lava to cool themselves down. They are not a starfaring race. The Commander Prime Ultra was grasping for anything to deny what was before him. We will simply bypass them. Think again. This was my final move, my masterpiece. We just provided them with faster-than-light technology. They will come to you in their ships, which can withstand anything you can do to them. Radiation, heat, plasma. They master those things. They will tear you apart. Ensign? Serena leaned close to my visual sensors. Had I not known her well, I would have been intimidated. As it was, I observed the Commander Prime Ultra lean back slightly. "We have a little saying here on Earth," she said in accented but fluent concordant trade, the language the commander and I had been using to this point. "Mess around and find out. If you think you're tough enough, come right ahead. We will stand by our allies and we will defeat you. Your decision." The Commander Prime Ultra was silent for a long moment. When it finally spoke, its voice had lost much of its arrogance. "There has clearly been a misunderstanding. Our Liberation Fleet will be halting its expeditionary cruise and heading back to port. We trust there will be no hard feelings over this." "That," I replied cheerfully, "will be up to the humans." I ended the call from my end, confident that those higher up the chain of command would take it from there, and raised my upper right tentacle. "You did it," I said. "You frightened them off. Is this what you call a high-five moment?" Serena obliged with a slap against the surface of the tentacle. My manipulation nodules weren't quite fingers, nor were there exactly 5 of them, but the principle remained the same. "We did it," she corrected me. I wish I could have seen his face. "I'll send you the recording," I assured her. "Did we just prevent a war?" I felt somewhat disoriented. "We sure did." Serena grinned. "It's a good feeling, isn't it?" "It is." I turned around, gazing up at the bright yellow sun and white clouds in the blue sky, and for the first time I truly appreciated their beauty. Despite the fact that it would kill me instantly, Earth was a truly pleasant place to be. I drifted weightless in the vacuum. Some individuals don't particularly enjoy freefall. I rather like it. An hour's nap in 0G leaves me nearly as refreshed as a full night's sleep, in the most comfortable groundside bed you can find. But I wasn't floating out there for my personal enjoyment. I was dissipating heat. The EVA suit I wore was a marvel of hybrid technology, human-designed insulation alongside bubbler superconductors, and other components that freely mixed one with the other within the suit's skin and helmet. It was all engineered to allow one thing to happen. Wearing that suit, I was going to set foot on Faz Reap, our best transliteration of the bubbler home planet's name, and walk among them. We still lacked a word for what frostlings called themselves. Human speech organs simply couldn't produce the correct phonemes, but they were good sports about it and seemed content to let us keep using that term, even knowing its origin. My closest bubbler friend, whose name sounded something like Kelvin when I ignored about half its syllables, personally found it amusing. During one of our video calls, he'd shown me where he had hung a picture of me blowing soap bubbles on his wall. In his home, it was rather touching. He'd introduced me to his spouse during that same call, and we'd gotten along immediately. The highlight was when she mentioned that Kelvin hadn't stopped talking about me for days after we'd scared off the Pyrax invasion force, then quipped about me being the other woman. I was laughing so hard I could barely breathe. I'd actually anticipated a reprimand after the Pyrax incident. Lowly ensigns weren't supposed to dictate interplanetary policy, but it had worked, and it had been Kelvin's idea to begin with anyway. I just played along and improvised by pouring the water over my head. He'd kept his promise about getting a recording to me. The expression on the Commander Prime Ultra's face suggested that his body was trying to evolve an orifice so he could soil himself. It was priceless. The powers that be back on Earth apparently thought that sort of initiative was worth encouraging because they fast-tracked me to JG. Or perhaps it was meant to punish me by letting me fail publicly. I didn't fail. After weeks of sleepless study, I took the exams and passed them, becoming the Navy's newest lieutenant, junior grade. That was a decade ago. Since then, I'd been promoted again to full lieutenant, while Kelvin and I continued to be the human and bubbler face of the Earth-Phas-Reap partnership. I'd even visited him and his family at home with my telepresence robot. The most precious moment was when his youngest, he'd gotten married following the Pyrax incident, pointed at me and then at the picture, yes, it was still there, and said, "That's her." That was when I knew they'd gotten the robot right. Just gonna say, infant frostlings are adorable. Their eyes don't quite work the way ours do, but it's easy enough to tell when they're looking at you. I've known Kelvin long enough that I can interpret his expressions, and he's done the same with me, so I know when a kid's looking at me with the equivalent of a wide-eyed expression. They also adore being hugged. I realize that large-scale tourism between human and bubbler cultures will never be feasible. The physical obstacles are simply too great. Telepresence serves as a decent interim solution, and the various human bubbler research facilities utilize these robots extensively, but I can't envision the immediate production of tourism robots for one-time visitors. Perhaps generic all-purpose models? My point is, the only frostlings that most of humanity will ever encounter are those I've been visiting with my telepresence robot. Having Kelvin operate his own robot on Earth is always entertaining. It still attracts attention, even after a decade. But what I mean is that the number of humans who have interacted with frostlings is incredibly small, just as the number of frostlings who've had contact with humans. So it remains largely up to me and Kelvin to maintain the public image of frostlings as our laid-back space friends. Well, that and the plush toys. Which brings me back to the suit I was wearing. It was designed to allow me to walk on the surface of Phas-Reap without freezing solid or letting any of my comparatively scorching body heat escape. I didn't want to melt the pavement after all. They were apparently developing a similar suit for frostlings to enable Kelvin to visit Earth. If that one proved successful, we were considering adapting the technology for a crewed mission to Mercury someday. That was the exciting aspect of combining human and bubbler tech. It unlocked all sorts of incredible possibilities. Before landing, I was orbiting Phas-Reap, currently on the night side. Their primary being a distant red dwarf, the night side wasn't much different from the day side, but it allowed me to cool the exterior of the suit down to a pleasant 8 or 9 K. That way, when I exited the cryopod at the other end, I wouldn't appear white-hot to their eyes. The one was also a hybrid creation, designed for human use and the ability to withstand a human temperature environment without exploding or melting. It would use a bubbler drive to bring me to the surface without generating excessive temperatures. Excessive in this case, meaning anything over about 50 Kelvin. Like me, it was orbiting Phas-Reap to release all excess heat. Unlike my suit, its external hatches were wide open, ensuring that temperatures were equalized inside and out. The sensor gauge in my helmet chimed, and I reviewed the readings. The exterior of my suit maintained a steady 9 Kelvin, cool enough that I wouldn't instantly harm any frostlings I encountered, which was fortunate. I was quite fond of the little creatures, especially Kelvin. I reached for the tether at my waist. Like the skin of the one in my suit, it was constructed of thermal superconducting material, bubbler technology, naturally. I pulled in the slack, then gave it a soft tug. Despite the cryopod's lightweight design, it still significantly outweighed me. The tug drew me toward it rather than the opposite, and I floated into the airlock as gently as a feather would on Earth. Grasping a handhold, I detached the tether and activated the auto reel button. Once it was inside the airlock, I pressed the control to seal all exterior hatches. Cryopod to Polaris. Temperature readings are all within acceptable range. I'm prepared to descend. Over. Polaris to Cryopod, we read you. Commodore Lorimar was a decade and some older and more seasoned than when I'd been a fresh-faced ensign under her command on Cosmic Voyager, but she'd been instrumental in keeping me involved with human-bubbler relations. Be careful. We'll be monitoring your transmission. Over. Understood, Polaris. Cryopod to Phas-Reap Orbital Command, requesting landing authorization. Over. We'd already secured this permission weeks prior, but it was always prudent to reaffirm the protocols. The only delay was due to lightspeed lag. Phas-Reap Orbital Command to Cryopod, you are authorized to land. Coordinates should be preloaded in your navcomp. You will be greeted upon landing. Have a pleasant visit, Lieutenant Vega. Well, that last bit was courteous. I suppose I'm as recognizable a face and name on Phasarip as Kelvin was on Earth. I wondered if their children carried plushies in my likeness, as ours did with Kelvin ones. Being well known was somewhat enjoyable, I concluded, as long as the recognition came in moderation. Acknowledged, Command. Cryopod, out. I brought up the coordinates and engaged the drives. Bubbler propulsion systems operate on slightly different principles than ours did when we initially encountered them. Expelling high-temperature gases from the rear to generate thrust would never have been suitable for such a thermally sensitive species. They still utilize particles to leverage Newton's third law, but employed different particles and did so much more discreetly. Through a combination of bubbler ingenuity and human brute force engineering, we developed a version that would work for us without necessitating constant immersion in liquid nitrogen. That was the technology the UNSN Polaris had used to transport me and Cryopod to Phasarip initially, and formed the basis of the space drives that the rest of the Navy now employed. The system I was using in Cryopod wasn't nearly as potent, but it only needed to get me to the planet's surface and back again. This was literally going to be the first human-crewed landing on the surface of the Frostlings' homeworld. It was quite significant, and I was determined not to mess things up. The light intensity on Phasarip wasn't particularly strong, being so distant from a frankly unimpressive sun, but we'd anticipated this, so my suit visor featured a HUD overlay of enhanced light imagery of what I would normally be seeing. I switched to this now, deactivating the human normal lighting, so that I'd be prepared for the actual conditions when I reached the planet's surface. From there, it was simply a matter of monitoring the auto-landing system, ensuring that the descent wasn't too rapid or too slow, and that there were no sensor anomalies to interfere with the basic AI managing the operation. Absolutely nothing unexpected occurred during the descent, which was precisely how I preferred it. While it's impressive to be praised for quick thinking in unforeseen circumstances, it's also valuable to be known as someone who can be relied upon as a dependable subordinate. Someone has to be present for duty during the intervals between exciting bursts of action, after all. I'd studied the maps we had of Phasarip, but my understanding of their geography wasn't nearly comprehensive. By the time Cryopod was halfway through its descent, I was fairly certain I didn't know where I was heading, except that it wasn't towards any of their major urban centers, which was likely a wise decision. Despite the thorough testing the cold suit had undergone back on Earth and in space, the last thing we desired was for some sort of catastrophic malfunction to release a thermal surge that could potentially crater a significant portion of occupied urban landscape. The fewer innocent bystanders present during our initial live test of the cold suit on Phasarip's surface, the better, just in case. As the cryopod glided in for a perfect landing in the center of a large paved area, I examined the scanners for any nearby habitation. There was none. The only noteworthy things apart from the local topography, mountainous, and external temperature, around 6 Kelvin, were a bubbler air car stationed at the opposite end of the landing pad, and 2 locals. One was Kelvin. I'd recognize him anywhere. The other was a slightly larger, more robust bubbler with an indescribable air of seniority, wearing a sash and equipment belt that appeared decidedly military. Kelvin, conversely, was dressed in the bubbler equivalent of a t-shirt and jeans. I waited until the one settled onto its struts, then unfastened my restraints and opened the outer hatch. It was only a short hop to the ground, I presumed water ice, but essentially anything beyond helium and some hydrogen compounds is solid to frostlings, and I jogged over to them. "Kelvin, hey," I greeted with a smile. "Great to meet you face to face at last." And it truly was. Telepresence robots were fine, but they didn't compare to being there in person. "Likewise, Serena," he replied, grinning with his mouth analog. "We've come quite a distance to reach this point, haven't we?" "We certainly have." I raised my hand and he slapped it with a tentacle. "So who's your companion?" "Ah, yes. Lieutenant Serena Vega of the Earth United Nations Space Navy. Meet Captain... He paused briefly. I could actually observe the flickers of light beneath his skin as he contemplated his next words. "Your vocal apparatus is insufficient to pronounce his name, so call him Frost. Captain Frost, of what I suppose you'd call an intelligence agency, he's here for your protection." "My security?" I was more than a bit surprised. "Do you think someone actually wants to harm me?" Not one of our own, Lieutenant Vega, Frost chimed in. I definitely got an old-school military impression from him. You are in fact more popular on Faz Reap than some of our national leaders. However, we have intercepted rumors that the Pyrax are mobilizing again, and there are unverified reports that a stealth vessel has been detected within the Faz Reap system. Shit, I blurted out. Apologies. Glancing over the HUD, I activated the radio. Vega to Polaris, did you receive that over? That's affirmative, Lieutenant, responded the radio operator on Polaris. The Commodore is informed. This report only came in while you were in descent phase. If you want to abort the mission, we can be overhead in 5 minutes. Over. I took a deep breath. What kind of threat does a Pyrax stealth ship pose to the Polaris? Over. Minimal, Lieutenant. Our sensors are monitoring local space, and they've never managed to conceal their drive signatures from us, stealth or no stealth. Even if one snuck up on us, they don't have a weapon that can damage us, and boarding simply isn't feasible. Abort or no. Over. Well, that made a certain amount of sense. We were only just now developing a suit that would allow a bubbler to walk on Earth, and that was with full scientific cooperation between humans and frostlings. The Pyrax had access to none of the hybrid tech that we'd created over the last decade, so they were out of luck. Their idea of an EVA suit would likely melt in an Earth-normal environment. And if there were, by some odd chance, Pyrax on the ground near us, well, their heat guns might raise my exterior temperature to a whopping 200 Kelvin. Oh, the terror. If that happened, I'd get Kelvin and Captain Frost under cover and go handle the situation myself. I hadn't brought a gun, but I happened to be quite skilled at throwing rocks. Sightseeing. First where previous. Next. I'm going to press on, I decided. I've got a security guy with me on the ground, but if things start getting dicey, I'll return to the cryopod. Over. I won't say I was angry with the Pyrax for attempting to interrupt my first in-person visit to Faz Reap, but I might have been slightly annoyed. To hell with them, I was going to complete this. Message received and understood, Lieutenant. Be careful. Over. I copy, Polaris. Vega, out. I turned to Kelvin and Captain Frost. All right, I assume you heard all that? Indeed, the intel guy confirmed. I can't say I understood the term dicey you used, but I grasped the meaning. I do appreciate your confidence in my ability to keep you safe. Kelvin and I exchanged an amused look. We both knew who'd be protecting whom, but I chose to let the good captain hold on to his illusions for now. Diplomacy took many forms after all. The Frostlings were like our cool, pun intended, little nerdy sibling who sincerely wanted to be our best friend and knew all sorts of clever tricks with low temperatures. I couldn't help but like them, and I didn't want to hurt their feelings. So, there was something I wanted to show you, Kelvin said. Remember when you took me to see that volcano in Hawaii? Kill everything, or something like that? Vesuvius? I asked, amused. Kelvin knew perfectly well what the real name was. This was him teasing Captain Frost a bit. Yes, that's the one. Kelvin motioned toward a path that led up the side of the nearest towering massif. From the way the scant light reflected off the rocks that made up the hillside, it was probably mostly nitrogen and oxygen ice. We've got something up there that might interest you. Okay, I'm officially curious. I nodded to Captain Frost. Want to scout ahead, ensure it's safe? Certainly. Wait right here. He started up the track, his locomotion tentacles moving smoothly over the oxygen. It was light blue rather than white, shale. While he didn't draw a weapon, one of his manipulation tentacles rested on one of the items on his equipment belt. How have you been? I asked Kelvin softly. Is home life treating you all right? Pretty well, actually. He gave me the bubbler version of a smile. I returned it, knowing he could see my face inside the helmet. Little Lumina has passed her general awareness preliminaries and has been accepted into a program for refining and purifying high-end materials. They say she's got a knack for it. The pride was clear in his voice. I patted him on the closest thing he had to a shoulder. Well done. Think she'd remember me if I dropped by? He twisted two of his tentacles together behind his back, the bubbler equivalent of shaking his head humorously. Remember you? She reminded me to tell you about that. Whenever you visited, it made their day. Even the time you brought that twisty square toy. That thing confused us so much. But you solved it eventually, I replied. Trust me, It caused just as much frustration back on Earth as it did here. Yes, and that's the only reason some people didn't accuse you of deliberately inflicting psychological warfare on us. He gave me an amused look. You never mentioned that you didn't know how to solve it at the time either. I rolled my eyes. It kind of slipped my mind, okay? We looked around as Captain Frost approached down the path. All clear, Captain? It all appears clear, Lieutenant. Come this way, if you would. He turned and led the way back up the trail, but slowed his pace to a crawl. That lasted until I came right up behind him with an unspoken threat to step on his tentacle tips if he didn't pick up the pace. Then he moved along a bit faster, though it still seemed he didn't think bipedal motion was very efficient. Maybe it's not, but we high-temperature aliens have a lot more energy to spare. Faz-Reap has about 2/3 of Earth's gravity, so I didn't have much trouble getting along, even wearing the cold suit. I knew I was generating more heat, but it was storing it away nicely. Along with the heat it was producing via its own operation. I'd been told that if I ever started feeling warm in the suit, to pause and rest for a few minutes to let it gradually release thermal energy. If I didn't, and it looked like I might overheat, it had been programmed to perform emergency venting. In that scenario, it was a really good idea to get all frostlings as far away from me as possible, preferably beyond the horizon. We reached the top of a small elevation, perhaps a mile or so up the mountainside. The cold suit's internal temperature display had risen a few degrees. I wasn't at dangerous levels yet, but that number wasn't too far off, so I was grateful for the chance to pause and survey the surroundings. "What's up here?" I inquired. "Take a look," Kelvin said, almost excitedly. He guided us to a fence promontory and gestured over the edge with his primary manipulation appendage. I followed and looked, then squinted and looked again, and about 50 yards below us, being forced out of the mountain like toothpaste from a tube, multiple hues in all, was an ice slurry composed of various elements. It was moving so slowly that an inattentive observer might think it stationary, but the motion was undeniably there. "Is that a cold volcano?" I asked incredulously. "You've got it." Kelvin high-fived himself cheerfully. "The planet's core is more or less solid, but the pressure down there's so intense that it'll transform it from solid to semi-liquid and expel it like this. They extract some really fascinating amalgams and compounds from flows like this. Stuff your scientists gaze at in amazement." "Well, I'll be," I murmured. Now I truly have seen everything. I made sure to scan over the entire cold lava flow. The experts back home would be scrutinizing my footage meticulously and petitioning the government for even more research grants on how large-scale cryogenic landscapes actually functioned. Kelvin produced what I recognized as a bubbler camera. "Hey, can I take a picture of you two in front of the lava flow?" He began moving a bit further up the path. "Sure, why not?" I shifted around slightly so that the flow would be visible behind me and signaled Frost to join me. "Let's do this." "Certainly." He moved in close, then looked up at me. "May I pose a question, Lieutenant?" "Go ahead," I said, posing with one arm over his shoulders. "Very well. I've examined your file and the records of the first contact between our two species, and there's one thing that perplexes me. Why do you engage with us?" I grabbed a piece of light blue oxyrock in response to Kelvin's shouted instruction and looked at Frost. "What do you mean?" "I mean, humans have essentially nothing to fear from us. We've already provided you with access to faster-than-light travel and numerous other scientific principles. You could discard us at any time, but you don't. You personally warned the Commander Prime Ultra of the Pyrax with war if he didn't back off from us. He wasn't a threat to humanity. Why did you do that?" Throwing the rock far and high, the lower gravity turning me into an effortless Olympic champion, I watched as Kelvin followed it with his camera pickup. "Well, for one thing, we like you. You're friendly, you're intelligent, and you offer a whole new perspective on the universe. 2, you don't threaten to try to take anything we already have. In fact, it's virtually impossible for you to take our stuff or for us to take yours. 3, and this is the most crucial part, the joint research is ongoing. If one of our scientists wants to create an environment at 5 Kelvin, it costs millions of dollars, and it can malfunction at any time. With you guys, all you need to do is step outside." As Kelvin returned down the trail, Frost frowned thoughtfully. "So you're saying it is still very much a two-way exchange?" "Oh, definitely. I was interrupted as my HUD flashed red and my radio activated in my ear. Hold on. Vega to Polaris, what's happening? It was Commodore Lorimar on the radio this time. She spoke quickly, her voice clipped, but every syllable was crystal clear. Lieutenant, we've just detected movement at the peak of that mountain you're standing next to. There's not supposed to be anyone up there. Return to the cryopod immediately. That's an order. That was when I felt the tremor through my boot soles, and I realized the warning had come too late. Oh no. I gazed up at the mountain. The summit was quite far away, but not as far as I would have preferred it to be, mainly because part of said summit was moving down the mountain in our general direction. As I watched, the developing avalanche spread, sending more and more boulders tumbling downhill, until it was evident we would be caught in its path. The distance and the lower gravity made its progress seem unnaturally slow, but I knew it would be moving plenty fast enough when it reached our location. "Let's go," I yelled. "We need to move." Without waiting for a response, I began racing down the mountain path as fast as I could manage. I'd trained for moving in 2/3 gravity while wearing the cold suit, so I felt pretty confident in my footing. At this pace, I figured I could reach the cryopod and take off before the avalanche caught up to me. But after just a few steps, I realized Kelvin and Frost weren't keeping up. A quick look back showed they were following, but already falling behind. "Kelvin," I called out, "hurry! We need to outrun this thing." "What a brilliant idea," he retorted sarcastically. "I never would have thought of that." Another few strides proved they weren't just slow to start. Their top speed simply wasn't fast enough. I could outpace the avalanche if I didn't delay any longer, but there was no way they'd make it. So I slowed down to let them catch up while I tried to think of a solution. "Lieutenant Vega, what are you doing?" Of course, Commodore Lorimar was monitoring my suit data. "Get out of there." "I'm sorry, ma'am," I said apologetically. Ignoring an order like this would definitely ruin my career, but I saw no alternative. I can't do that. I can't abandon them. I'd been thoroughly briefed on the political and diplomatic implications of this visit before ever trying on the cold suit. Kelvin and I essentially represented the Human Bubbler Alliance. If anything happened to either of us, especially if I left him behind, it would have massive repercussions for both our species. And besides, there was no way I'd leave my best bubbler friend like that. I owed it to him and to his family to get us all out of this alive and well, or vigorously squirming in their case. The question remained, how? "Drag them along or carry them," she commanded. "I don't care how you do it, just get yourself out of there." That wasn't really a viable option either. Frostlings were quite fragile, and if I attempted to drag them along by a tentacle each, I risked tearing the appendages right off. And if I lifted them up and carried them, the suit might accidentally crush them to death before I got them to safety, which meant I needed to think of another approach. "Kelvin," I said as he and Frost came up beside me. I extended my stride accordingly to match their pace. "Does this mountain have any particular cultural significance?" "Well, we gave it a name," he said uncertainly, as he hurried along on undulating locomotion tentacles. "What do you—" "Oh. Oh." "Oh?" asked Captain Frost from the other side. "What do you mean by oh?" "Your decision, Kelvin," I said briskly. "Yes or no?" To his credit, he barely paused. "We can always give it a new name." "Good." I came to an abrupt stop and turned to face back up the trail. "Run. Run quickly. And when I call out, get behind cover." "Going now." He grabbed Frost by a spare tentacle and urged him down the trail. "Come on. The intimidating human says run, we run." "But why is she not running? Why must we seek cover?" The other bubbler's voice faded down the pathway. I took a moment to steady my breathing. My heat gauge was up another few points, dangerously close to the critical mark as it was. Whoever had briefed Captain Frost had clearly omitted a few very important aspects. That was something that would need to be addressed later, if we all made it through. Above me, the avalanche roared down toward me. Even in this lower gravity, its speed was remarkable. I doubted I would survive an impact from even one of those boulders. "Lieutenant Vega?" Commodore Lorimar's voice was low and calm. "Are you certain this is a wise course of action?" "No," I said honestly, "but it's the best of a series of poor options. This gives Kelvin and me the highest chances of survival." "Understood." She exhaled, sounding tired. We'll keep an eye on the situation. Good luck, Lieutenant. Thank you, ma'am. I checked my rangefinder. The nearest boulders were 250 meters away and approaching rapidly. 200, 150. Setting up thermal dump, 100. Take cover, 50 meters. Activating now. When establishing a thermal dump, it was possible to release the heat in all directions, or to vent in one direction only. Although I'd chosen that direction to be forward, I knew that the heat could bounce back behind me, and even a fraction of the thermal surge I was about to generate would be absolutely lethal to frostlings, which was why I'd instructed Kelvin to take cover. A seam split open along the front of my suit. The thermal batteries in the cold suit were highly efficient and stored quite a lot of heat. This poured out toward the incoming avalanche with devastating results. Massive amounts of rocky ground simply flashed straight from solid to gaseous, existing as liquid for a mere instant. The tumbling boulders of oxygen and nitrogen coming one way collided with the wavefront of thermal energy going the other, and one was confirmed as the unstoppable force. Spoilers, it wasn't the avalanche. Even having anticipated melting most of the landscape and dealing with the liquid afterward, I was astonished and stunned by the sheer destruction. But there was more to come. The upper end of the avalanche had yet to arrive. Cold began to seep into my limbs and chest as the inherent chill of Fazarit pushed past the compromised insulation and started to drain the very heat from my body. I had to hold on. Kelvin was counting on me. I couldn't let his wife or kids down. Violent tremors shook my body. That's it, Lieutenant. Lorimar's voice sounded distant, muffled to my ears. The avalanche is over. Button up and get back to the ship now. Now. It was the repetition that got me moving, as naval discipline intended it to. I sent the command to close the seam and felt the cold suit attempting to warm me up. But I'd depleted nearly all the thermal batteries, and I could barely feel my hands and feet. Turning, I began stumbling downhill again, trudging through the rapidly freezing slush, which was all that remained of the avalanche. I managed another 200 yards, past the last of the slush, before I stumbled and fell to all fours, gasping for air, trying to summon the strength to move through the terrible chill that enveloped my body from every direction. Then I felt tentacles lifting me, supporting me. Careful, Kelvin's voice warned. She's still got magma clinging to her boots. Don't let it touch you. She's still scorching hot, exclaimed Frost from the other side. My sash is smoking. Turning my head, I could see that the two frostlings had removed their sashes and were using them as cushioning to shield themselves from the heat still emanating from the cold suit. The area around the seam would have been white hot, but even my arms were more like red hot. To them it was searing heat. To me, it was beyond Arctic cold. Let it smoke, Kelvin told him. I'll get you a new one. We need to get her to her ship before she dies. In a strange imitation of a three-legged race, we stumbled down the mountain. By the time we reached the cryopod, I was drifting in and out of consciousness. Kelvin climbed in and pulled, while Frost pushed from behind. Once I was inside, Kelvin pressed the button to close the airlock without exiting first. What you doing? I mumbled. You won't be able to pilot this ship to orbit, he said quickly. Does it have a go-home button? Yes, it does. Commodore Lorimar's voice came crisply from the speakers. But the ship will detect Lieutenant Vega's condition and automatically adjust the interior to Earth normal conditions to combat her hypothermia. Even mostly unconscious, I understood what that meant. Kelvin would perish before we got halfway there. His body would melt. I didn't want him dying because of me. I mumbled. Power feed? Kelvin caught on. Emergency power feed for the suit? One that doesn't require the cabin to heat up? Yes, but we still need to get her back here immediately, or she'll suffer permanent damage before we can get down there to assist her. Kelvin assisted me in strapping in, then found the power feed. As he connected it to the suit, I noticed his outer layer had turned an alarming shade of green from the thermal radiation the cold suit was emitting. He flashed me a very bubbler-like grin. I'm not just an astrogator. I've also had pilot training. Let's see if it translates across. I lost consciousness before he got the cryopod airborne. When I next came to, it was in a medbay bed. Machines were hooked up and beeping occasionally, but nothing sounded urgent. Cautiously, I wiggled my fingers and toes. Everything appeared to be still attached. Ah, Lieutenant, it's good to see you're still with us. I turned my head, which was about the only part of me without a sensor cord attached, to see Commodore Lorimar. Ma'am, I croaked. Sorry about disobeying orders? She shook her head and waved dismissively. You were the senior officer on site. I had no business second-guessing your decisions. Plus, you rescued the Frostlings and dealt with the Pyrax, so that's a bonus too. Her words jogged my memory. Kelvin, I coughed, then tried again. Kelvin, is he... He made it, she grimaced. The cold suit was damaged by the thermal dump, which is why it wasn't sealing properly afterward. He suffered thermal shock to 2 of his tentacles and had to have them removed. The experts are working on prosthetics for him now, but he's alive and well and has asked to be notified when you were able to talk. The wave of relief through my body was tempered by the knowledge that he'd been injured saving me. Water, I rasped. Of course. She fetched a cup, then helped me sit up and carefully drink half a cup of water. Afterward, I felt considerably better. Then she retrieved a tablet and activated it. With some careful maneuvering, I was able to hold it amidst the numerous medical sensors attached to my fingers and arms. Kelvin appeared on the screen, grinning like a bubbler maniac. I could see the skin damage on one side of his face and the bandaging on the stumps of his tentacles, but he seemed to be in good spirits. Serena, he exclaimed. Oh, great, you're awake. And you're injured, I said. I'm so sorry. This wasn't what I intended. Hey, I made it through. I'm just relieved you did too. And they say they can replace my tentacles. Perhaps they'll give me ones that don't melt when they touch a malfunctioning cold suit. He laughed softly. That was the most thrilling thing that's happened to me in ages. I blinked. All right. So, how did you manage when the medics came on board to get me off? That's how I lost the other tentacle, he shared. I hid in the starboard airlock, and they entered through the port airlock. But the inner hatch got extremely hot, so when I tried to defend myself, ouch. Before they left, they reset the controls so it returned and landed where we took off from. Let me tell you, it was really good to be back on firm ground. Well, I'm glad you're mostly all right, I said. How's Captain Frost doing? Still writing his report, last I heard. Kelvin chuckled. There's the Pyrax incident, and you melting the mountain, and how you were walking through molten magma, and how I went up with you and came back down with 2 melted tentacles. Hold on, go back. Commodore Lorimar mentioned the Pyrax, and what happened to the mountain again? A cold knot was forming in the pit of my stomach, and it had nothing at all to do with the temperature on Fazreep. You melted it. There's now a valley with 2 much thinner peaks on either side. They found remnants of the Pyrax craft on the far side. You melted those too. Kelvin was clearly enjoying the expression on my face. Oh, God, I muttered. I'm in deep trouble, aren't I? Kelvin made a gesture of denial, a bit awkward with his 2 missing tentacles. Not at all. You saved Frost and me and eliminated a Pyrax raiding party. You're a hero. But I transformed a mountain into a valley. Look on the bright side. Last I heard, they were considering naming the valley after you. He started to laugh. I had to join in, because why not? After all, it wasn't every day I got to reshape the landscape and have it named after me.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.